Ladies and gentlemen, investors have changed their appetite. We're definitely seeing the advanced investor do things they've never done before. Stay tuned. We're going to tell you about investing today in property, what the seniors are doing.
I'm the ringleader, so listen up.
Karate chop.
Good morning, everyone. Welcome to Morning Minutes. Myself, Michael Bergio, Mark Novak, episode 1430. What are top veteran property investors doing in today's market? We always hear about first home buyers getting into the market. Nearly a lot of the policies are steered towards them. A lot of the talk is steered towards the younger people, which rightfully so. We know that's where a lot of wealth creation has been very successful for the older generation. So we want to encourage and educate people to get in the market. But we don't often hear what are the older investors doing? What are the people who've been investing for 30, 40 years doing with their property? Is it the same to what the young 20-year-old is doing? Is it different? Mark, take us away. Like, first, what age are we talking about with the older investor, and maybe how many properties? What are we talking about?
Look, 40 upwards. I'd say 40, 50, 60, more 50, 60. I think their appetite normally when they get to about 75 tends to sort of wane a little bit. I notice with our old clients, they won't be buying stuff, at that age. But what's definitely happened is every single, and these are clients, to answer your question, upwards of 5 properties.
Mm.
They've had an appetite their whole life. They've worked, and most of them worked really bloody hard. None of them are like, geez, that was lucky that I bought back then. They've
Yeah.
fought. They've worked hard. They've got to this position. They've got two things on the mind: transition of wealth. Obviously, what are the kids going to do? But the main thing is, the whole world of the way they used to invest in the 70s and 80s is completely different now. It's completely different. So the stuff they were buying when you and I were growing up, Michael, when I was growing up, is completely different to the stuff they're buying today. As they get older, their appetites changed, and as policies have changed, land tax, things like that, their appetites definitely changed a lot.
Yeah, and I think when people hear someone's got 5 properties, they think, "Oh, that doesn't apply to me." They're like a CEO of a Fortune 500 company, but it's it's not the case. Like, if you're looking at your parents, where they may have bought the house 40 years ago, and then nearly every 10 years they've bought an extra property, and they've only been on a school teacher salary. Nothing. It hasn't been anything that it's not. It's very common around the northern beaches to see a family with at least 3 to 5 properties, and I think the big difference between the younger purchaser and the older is the younger. When you're at your highest capacity for working income, you will forego a rental income on an asset that will have great capital growth. You see a lot of younger purchasers buy residential over commercial because your capital growth tends to be a lot larger. And while you've got the higher income in your 20s, 30s, and 40s, you're happy to be just paying off that loan, having the capital growth that will be double, triple in 30 odd years. But I think the key shift is when you're, say, over 50, you don't really necessarily care if the property is going to double in 10 or 20 years. You go, I want cash now. I've worked my whole life, been very diligent with my spending to pay off these debts, and I want to enjoy the money. I don't want to have $3 million tied up in assets and be cash poor, but I also want to stay in property because if I'm going to live for another 20, 30 years, there's still a lot of growth there. I can leave the kids, and they're just not wired to switch off the income, the value, or the property ownership. So that's where we see a lot of older, especially with now land tax going like through the roof, where I know in Narrowena, if you have a house that's like your second investment property, nearly the land tax will eat away the whole income for that asset. And if that's what you're trying to live off now, it doesn't really serve you well to be holding that asset. So we're seeing a lot of older investors getting into commercial assets with higher rental returns or assets with multiple incomes on the one property. I think has been a key shift.
Yeah, I think there's there's two things there. One, there's that no, they're never going to tell you. No one's ever going to tell you. These older guys, older girls that are investors are in a mortgage prison.
Mm,
What that means is, the loan that they had the ability to get when they were 10 years ago or 15 years ago, they can't actually get that loan for that property any longer. It's a legacy loan that they're in. It's probably a little bit higher interest rate. And if they went to any other bank wouldn't refinance it because responsible lending's changed, open banking's changed. It's much harder to get the loan. So that's different. So they're chasing that. That's making them chase cash harder because the next property they want to make sure is kicking in a shitload of cash. So they're not in a mortgage prison. Do you reckon? Do you know what mortgage prison is? Does everyone know what mortgage prison is, or did I cover that?
I think run through it.
Okay, so just to detail what I just said. So some people have got loans at the moment, they own property at the moment, and if they went to the bank and asked for the same loan for the same property, another bank, all banks would say no. So that means mortgage prison. So
Yeah,
they're stuck with the bank that they're with, and the bank that they're with often hikes rates pretty much harder than the overall market. So they can be stuck in a loan they'll never get to go and refinance at an interest rate that's too high. It's mortgage prison.
and I think
So,
a key. Yep.
yep. Sorry, mate.
And I think a key thing for the senior investor, especially if they're trying to make a transition from equity equity rich properties with great capital growth to a higher yielding asset, is they can't leave it too late because exactly what you just said, it gets a lot harder to get a loan. And if you want to be transferring, you may have $3 million worth of residential assets bringing in $90,000 a year, and you want to transition that to $3 million of, say, commercial assets bringing in 200 grand a year. There may be something that you want that's 3.5, and you think, well, surely I can get a loan for 500 grand when I've got all this cash. It becomes very difficult, especially when you're getting older. So you don't want to leave it too late because you can get stuck where clients say it all the time. I've been a client of that bank for 50 years and they won't let me do
Yeah.
this. I've got all this
Where's the
equity.
loyalty?
Yeah, they get very, very upset with it all.
And also, there's the there's a big transition at about 40
Yeah,
that looks like this. So what starts happening is that going the right way? No, that going the right way. What starts happening is your equity starts, continues to grow, but the necessity for that equity is very different. So when these guys are sort of 20, 30, 40, they're chasing equity hard, which is the value in the property growing. They can't spend that money. They're not really concerned with the rent that it brings in because it's sort of pittance. But when it gets to that X factor, when that sort of starts going the opposite, is it about 40? So at about
yeah,
40, people start going, you know what, actually, I've got more equity than I can spend. Like, if I may have $1 million in equity, but what am I going to do with that? I would like something per week, per day. So then they start laboring less on equity, the property value going up. So they look at asset classes or properties that are not kicking in as much capital growth, but they look at asset classes or properties that are kicking in more cash per week, per year, per month. So that's when you see the investors come to us saying, hey, we just want something with a 7-8% return per year, and you go to them, that if I get you something like that, it may be a shit property. They're like, we don't care as long as it kicks in the cash.
yeah. And that's what we see, the big shift. And then that's when it's a good chance for the older couple, the senior investor, to help the kids out sometimes when they're downsizing and they've got access to the cash. So you can swap to an asset with a higher rental return, help the kids or the grandkids out with a deposit as well. So a lot can be
Yep.
done in that transition.
Yep. So it's chasing the cash. And then the land tax, Michael, you mentioned, and I really I want to labor on that because these guys are getting, a lot of my clients, it's not unusual for me in the course of a week every day to hear about a client that has a 100, 200, 300,000 a year land tax bill. Um, so every year they're paying that out to the government. It's crippling. And
Yeah.
again, people go, "Oh, yeah, it's good that they've got enough property to have to pay that." But it's like, yeah, but 20, 30 years ago, this thing didn't exist.
Yes.
The land tax thresholds were so much lower, the valuations were so much lower. They weren't cutting checks for 2 or 300 grand every year.
And they had
So
an income and they were working.
they were
So it gets a lot
working.
tighter when you're not working.
Yep.
But yeah, I think that's yeah. Anything else you want to cover on the seniors?
Nah, look, it's real. It's real, guys. So
Yep.
if you try, and I think don't model yourself on what the seniors are doing either, because they've got a different appetite. They're making different moves than what the younger people are doing. So the younger investors are chasing capital growth, the property value to go up. That's where the big cash is, 2 to 1.
Yep.
And they're saving it. And then the older guys are wanting to spend it a little bit more and they're chasing the cash. They want that rent to be huge. So, capital growth is not as important because they've sort of built it in already to their lives. They think, what do I need more for?
Exactly. Well said. I think that's enough.
Giddy up. Have a great day. Thanks.